Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Chamber of the Wraith. My name is Brian, and I'm sorry that I'm shining the light in your eyes, Kat. Today is going to be a little bit of an impromptu .5 episode of the WraithCast, because I have a very special guest. And much like when I had Judge on talking about Shiva, they're going to be talking a lot about Batman and the Outsiders, which I think is really cool, because in my mind, I think these little .5 episodes are going to be really cool just to kind of get more people on and have them talking about their interests, because that's kind of the whole point of the existence of this thing. So, without further ado, let's get started. Never using flashlight for lighting again.
Hello.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, okay.
All right, excellent. Why don't you tell the audience of the WraithCast who you are first?
Hi, everyone. I'm Honey Ham. I'm at Exalted Comics on Twitter, or Comics Exalted.
Because comics are exalted.
Exalted Comics was already taken, so I had to flip the words around.
I mean, it still works, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And what do you have for us today? I mean, I know what we have, but what do you have for us today?
I'm here to talk, gush, about my favorite comic book run ever made.
Oh, and that would be Batman and the Outsiders?
Yep.
Cool.
Specifically, the sequel, which we'll get to probably at another date, the 1986 Outsiders run, is definitively my favorite. But for now, we're going to talk about the... It's weird to call these separate runs because the plots, it just runs right from one to the other. They're more like a single cohesive story that just happens to have two names.
Kind of like a first movie and a sequel, as it were.
Exactly, yeah.
So we'll start with, well, I guess what we'll call A New Hope, and then we'll get to Empire Strikes Back when we can. Sounds fun to me.
And then we can get to the really awful stuff another time.
Yeah, because if nothing else, people love to hear about the awful shit.
Well, don't worry then. I've got some stuff to talk about. This series isn't all perfect.
Well, no story really is, right? So,
Nope.
Trying to think here. I'm just trying to see, when did the Outsiders first kind of become a thing? Because I'm just looking at, I'd like to have a point of reference to, is this before or after Babs? And I'm going to guess it's before Babs, since she first showed up as Oracle in 1989, so...
Yeah, this is pre-Crisis. It is the actual origin of the Outsiders happens before the series itself even becomes a thing.
Oh, yeah.
At the dawn of the 80s, DC had 4 ongoing Batman titles. Batman, Detective Comics, World's Finest, and Brave and the Bold. And they were canceling Brave and the Bold at the time. I'm not familiar with why, that's not really important. But what is important is the South American publishing branch of them was like, hey, we need another Batman title to go along. It's kind of weird to imagine a time where we had to ask for a 4th Batman book. But that was what it was. And the editors and stuff asked Mike Barr if he had any ideas, and he presented the idea of Batman leading a team. And they thought it was an interesting idea, and Jim Aparo was the lead artist on Brave and the Bold. And they loved Jim. He was a very dedicated artist, very loyal to the company, so they wanted to keep him around. And so they gave him the job next to just like, okay, you can move from Brave and the Bold, which we're ending, and you can go right back onto Batman and then the Outsiders.
You know, back when artists were actually treated like human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for the most part, but you know what I mean.
Well, that's not even 100% case back then, because Mike Barr was even suggested by the higher-ups that he could just stop working with older artists if he felt like it.
Yeah, see, that's not cool.
Yeah. But at the time, but luckily, Mike Barr had an excellent editor working with him on this one, where he had Len Wein, one of my favorite editors ever, overseeing the creation. And it was actually Len Wein who suggested having Batman quit the Justice League to form the Outsiders, because Mike was a bit more conservative. He just wanted Batman to maybe do the Justice League and the Outsiders at the same time, so, make everyone happy. But no, Len was like, it'll be more impactful to the story if we have him just be full-time on the Outsiders. And so that eventually led to the whole story being printed in 1983.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. And that's first story, issues one, particularly issue 1, with issue 2 just basically being a big climactic finale to issue 1, is a masterclass in how to start your comic. Because it starts with the first, 8 pages of the first issue is just about Batman. Because the audience knows who Batman is. So we can use this time to establish framing why the Outsiders are a thing that needs to exist, what makes them different from the Justice League, what is the problem that they are solving.
Right.
And we get all of that solved before the Outsiders even come into the picture, with Batman just being basically angry that the Justice League had become too status quo, too fitting within what the governments want and not actually fixing problems. And so he wanted the Outsiders to do that, do what the actual Justice League was too cowardly to do at the time. And then immediately after that, we jump to Markovia, which is the setting for this issue, and we're introduced also to Geoforce, the Prince of Markovia, and that's just another 2-for-1 introduction to the thing, where we're established to both a major important character to the story and the setting that we'll be doing the story in, which the issue is really good at using as much space as it can. So no single page is just padding or random dialogue to establish personalities. Every line has some amount of plot relevance. Every scene, and nothing is rushed, nothing is compressed, because we're able to do 2 or 3 things at a time by establish setting and introduce a character related to that setting at the same time. And then after we introduce Markovia, we introduce Rex Mason, Metamorpho, who has come to Markovia for a reason. So now we can use the transition period of a thing we've already established to introduce another main character for the story.
And Metamorpho was in stories before this, right? He isn't a brand new character?
Yes, Mike Barr established right away when he wanted to do this, they wanted to have an even split between original characters and existing characters. And besides Batman, the other 2 existing characters that joined the team are Metamorpho and Black Lightning, 2 characters who did not survive into the 80s at this time. Metamorpho was a Silver Age character who sort of died with the Silver Age, and Black Lightning was a tragedy where his storyline just died as a result of the DC Comics implosion, which is a whole nother story unto itself.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we throughout the first issue, we get just slowly just an avalanche of characters and information as things pick up, because now that we've established Metamorpho, we can pick things up now. We know the setting, we know the characters, we know some of the characters, so we back into Batman, who has arrived in Markovia, alongside Black Lightning, who's with him. So now we have another character being introduced. And at this point, the audience has gotten into the rhythm of things. We understand, okay, there's going to be some characters, there's going to be conflict, we know what's going on, and so we're immediately then thrust into Halo and Katana, who are our big mystery characters. They're the characters who we don't really know anything about at the start. Katana, we learn a little bit more in the 3rd and 4th issues, and Halo, we don't learn anything about her because she's got amnesia until a full 20 issues into the run.
Goodness gracious me.
Yeah, it's a slow burn on her part, but but they are all fantastic characters, so it really makes you invested in what's going on. But the first issue ends with them just finally meeting the villain of the story and having all of the individual characters shown off what they can do as individuals and lose. And then the issue 2 showcases all of them working together as a unit to defeat the big boss. And it's a brilliant cohesion of just here's what our characters can do individually. Now here's what they can do as a team, and they can do so much more as a team. And that level of teamwork and cohesion is a big theme across the series, because as we'll get along later, there's a lot of times where we'll have a problem that feels like a one-person problem, where this is my problem and I need to solve it, but they're never able to solve it by themselves. They need the rest of the team, because teamwork makes the dream work.
Nice. Teamwork does make the dream work. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, at this point, I guess we should just explain who each of these individual characters are, because we laid a little bit about who Metamorpho and Black Lightning are. They're pre-existing characters. Everyone knows who Batman is. Metamorpho is an Indiana Jones archaeologist-style character who ends up getting cursed with a magic orb that turns him into a living combination of elements and atoms. He can just become whatever element he wants, but he can't become a man. He's stuck as this monstrous freak, and his big goal in life is to find a cure to return to being human so he can be with his wife, or fiancé at the time. And Black Lightning, he is a complicated character in terms of just explaining who he is, but for the most part, he is a blaxploitation character in the vein of Luke Cage and stuff, where his gimmick was that he could he had electricity powers.
Yeah.
And so that was his main thing that he added to the team, was he added urban elements of the black people in the street, and he added electricity as sort of counteract to Metamorphosis. Those were and Geoforce. Those were the three like big meta-human people. Geoforce was he's probably the weakest in terms of being the least interesting, but he's physically the strongest. He's got super strength. He could fly by controlling gravity and lava, because his powers are all like just everything the Earth can do. He's as strong as the Earth. He can create gravity, and he can create lava.
Wow,
and so
that's pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he can fly by basically making himself light enough with gravity, and then propelling himself with the lava, which never seems to actually cause any environmental damage, as he's just scattering lava around as he flies.
Comic logic. We can roll with that.
Yeah. And then Halo, as we'll learn, is also a powered character, but her powers are a lot more bag of tricks style thing, where she has she is actually as we'll eventually learn, is a cosmic celestial being from the dawn of time called an Oracles. Or Oracle, or however. The pronunciation is implied to be the same as Oracle, but its spelling is so drastically different that it's easier to remember them as the Oracles.
Yeah, that's a little bit unusual, especially since I have another Oracle on the brain basically constantly. So.
Yeah, but her powers range from 7 different colored rays that she can use that all have completely not related effects. She has a heat beam, a bright sunlight beam, creates a beam that has a very specific function where it makes her invisible and creates a holographic projection of herself at the same time. And that is the exact function of, like, she can't, like, create other illusionary things or anything like that. She could only, she has to turn herself invisible and make the projection of herself as one single power.
So, wait, she basically is, like, yeeting a projection of herself while going invisible so that it creates the illusion that she's coming at you?
Basically, yeah, it creates a separate target so that she can move into the area and attack without being noticed. She has it once with a very interesting byproduct where she was tracking some people and while swimming underwater, and to make sure they didn't see her, she created her projection even deeper underwater where it wouldn't be seen, but she wouldn't be like pressured by the water. So she was invisible and they couldn't see her projection. So there were some instances where she could manipulate the property of the effect, but it was still very limited in what the power could do.
It's very specific, but she got clever and figured out how to use it in certain situations that might not have worked otherwise.
Right. And lastly, we get to my all-time favorite character, personal BFF of all time, Katana. I utterly adore this woman. I've been following her ever since I've gotten in, like, seen her in the Outsiders. I just kept reading. She, as we all have seen from the infamous Air Suicide Squad, her sword traps the souls of those slain by it. But that is actually only like the tip of the iceberg for what her sword actually does. Because it's not just some simple, oh, if she kills you, you're like super dead. But actually it is an actual prison inside the sword that the souls are trapped in. And she can conjure those souls like Pokemon to do her bidding in the middle of a fight. Or use their abilities when she needs them.
If I can very quickly interject, this is because I have a lot of Mortal Kombat fans on here. We're not talking about Princess Katana from Outworld with the Crazy Fans. No. We're talking about Katana, spelt like the sword, who is beginning to sound a little bit more like Kenshi than I even realized.
I honestly hate her name. It's such a lazy name. Like the line is, "I am the name of my sword. I am Katana." But the name of her sword is the Soul Taker.
So why isn't she called Soul Taker?
Yeah. Soul Taker is a way more badass name than Katana.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the one little weak part about her, but she is great. The most interesting thing about Katana is her tragic backstory of her husband and 2 children being murdered by a crazy stalker guy who wanted her and who worked in the Yakuza, and she went on a revenge streak and just slaughtered everyone in the Yakuza that was in a problem and became this was her superhero origin. I don't understand why we're not getting a Katana-related movie, because she's just John Wick with a sword.
And the ability to summon the souls of the dead. She's Kenshi without the blindness and telekinesis, people.
She's an amazing character.
Get her in Injustice 3 on that basis, and I think we're off to the races.
Mm-hmm. She has the most important thing with Katana in the run of Outsiders itself is her dynamic with Halo. Because Halo comes into the picture as an amnesiac teenager. We later learn more about that why, but she comes in as just a teenager with no knowledge about who she is. They need somebody to raise her, and rather than making this a deal of sexism where Katana's the only other woman so they saddle her with raising the kid, Batman actually makes an excellent character analysis and sees Katana and her bloodthirstiness as very similar to him during the very beginning of his days as Batman, like Golden Age Batman he's reflecting her character as. Like Batman who strangled people with a bat rope across a helicopter and actually used guns.
Yes, which that era of gun use didn't last very long, but the killing people lasted a little bit longer.
Yeah, and Batman, he doesn't outright say the Golden Age or anything like that, but he's like, yeah, you are as bad as I was in the beginning. You need a kid sidekick, like I got Dick, to help ground you and return some of your humanity back to you. And so that's why Katana gets slugged with being a Halo surrogate parent, and she does really well because Katana, first and foremost, is a mother character. She did not want to be a superhero. She wanted to be a housewife, and that was taken from her. So her adapting to being Halo's mom came second nature to her. But the real trauma came later on in the series when we find the parents of Halo's body, because and Halo, and they don't know Halo's backstory yet. They just think, oh, she has amnesia and these are her parents. And so Katana just has to give up Halo after spending like 2 years developing an emotional attachment to her.
That's rough, dude.
Yeah.
Poor Tatsu.
Mm-hmm. So, the first 8 or so issues of the run after the are primarily just individual episodic stories. They're just, okay, here's a villain. More than likely, they're a villain in Gotham, and like the first issue, where it's a lot of setting up, where it's showing how the characters fight, their abilities, how the things they can do as characters, one-on-one scenarios against random one-off villains. There is a 2-parter scattered in this, and it's basically serves as a setup for future multi-parter storylines. This was back in the day when people expected self-contained stories, and so they had to wean the audience into the idea that the series was going to have multi-part epics across the stories. And then we get introduced to the main crux of what makes The Outsiders what it is, and that's the individual story arcs about each character. And we start that with Black Lightning, who has probably the weakest of the individual stories, but that's because it also serves both to establish the concept of story arcs for this run, and also to establish the one of the Outsiders' most significant villains, the Masters of Disaster, who are very prominent and repeatedly make further appearances later on. So it was a valid sacrifice on Lightning's part.
Right.
And then we get introduced to Katana's story arc, where she has to deal with some Yakuza who are left over who want revenge. And we learn about the limits of her sword, where they are able to conjure the warriors from that were used by the sword as like mini bosses for the Outsiders to fight. And that ends up actually leading into a one-off Batman-related story, because like we don't need a Batman-related single dedicated story. This is Batman. Everyone knows who Batman is, and he has an entire ongoing run all dedicated to himself. But this was a good way to introduce Batman as an actual person to the rest of the Outsiders, because until then, Batman had just been he had not introduced who he was. He was just Batman. They didn't know who Bruce Wayne was. So this was their introduction to him, and made them get closer to him as a character, and also was kind of, can the Outsiders beat Batman when he's in a fever-induced haze?
When Batman goes crazy!
Pretty much, yes.
Fun.
And then we get to the more complicated story arcs, where Metamorpho, Geoforce, and Halo start to interweave their story arcs. And this is where we get to like the big 10-issue story that like really sold the run. But it's also where we get to probably the most problematic element of the run. And that is during issue 14 or so, I believe. Okay, actually, in issue 3, we're established to both Halo's presumed age, which is they believe her to be 15 to 16 based on her body. And we are introduced to a perceived age for Geoforce, where he is getting his master's degree in college as his civilian identity, and he's immediately clocked as a master's student because of how old he looks. I bring up these ages for something you can probably see is happening.
Am I going to have to deal with a Bruce Babs-style relationship between Halo and the Prince of Markovia?
Sadly, yes. They establish a very, very creepy secret affair in the background going on, and the two of them, it is just all amounts of creepy. And at this point in time, you start to realize, and Len Wein is no longer the editor on this. Mike Webb is both writing and editing his own story, which, when you get to that situation, it's very easy to fuck up and get a problem like this because there's no one watching your back. You can just sort of, I gotta meet my deadlines, I'm going to introduce something to the story, and then you don't really think of the consequences because these are fictional characters in your head.
Yeah.
So none of this is on Mike Webb's part. This is clearly just a case of did not think any of this through. It gets ended like 3 or 4 issues later, thankfully enough. Unfortunately, it does not end with a bang, but with a whimper, because we learn the reason that Markov started the relationship with Halo was because his sister Tara had died in the Teen Titans at that same time during the whole Judas contract. And,
whoa, what? Hold on.
Oh yeah, sorry, that was I misforgot that. Yeah, Geoforce is Tara's brother.
I figured that when you mentioned Tara. We all know the I was actually when I said Bruce and Babs, I was like, wait a minute, the Tara Deathstroke thing feels like it makes a little more sense here, because at least the Babs that I read and I'm familiar with, she's at least in her 30s, and then Bruce would be like in his 40s to 50s. So while still extremely creepy, it's like the age gap is a little bit bigger. So I figured Tara to Deathstroke, which that is a whole other mess of note. But both of these family members, it turns out, have had the same sort of problem on opposite ends.
Mm-hmm. But here's where it gets really problematic, where Brian reveals that the reason he was attracted and involved with Halo was because she reminded him too much of his sister.
Wait. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me see if I got this wrapped around my head right. Because we love a good tearing down. Ya boy Geoforce was attracted to his sister Tara. But he also got attracted to Halo. But he broke off his attraction to Halo because he was too attracted to Tara, somebody who was...
No. So Tara dies in the Judas contract, and then Brian starts dating Halo. And he revealed that the reason he started dating Halo was grief over Tara's death, which that alone would be kind of okay. Not really, but kind of. Except for the fact that he then throws in the curveball saying she reminded him too much of Tara, which was why he started dating her.
Oh, well, okay, so I got bits of that backwards. Either way, that makes it worse.
Yeah. Luckily, this, in a way, lucky for this storyline, unlucky for the actual issue this takes place in, this ends up spiraling into Brian's dedicated solo story of the run, where in the last issue, in the previous issue, a friend of his in college had been in a small little subplot where she was getting sexually harassed by her professor and basically blackmailed by him to either do sexual favors or like drop out of school because I'm going to flunk you. And so she was about to commit suicide. And at the end of that issue, she calls Brian. And Brian gets the call after he and Halo have broken up. And so we get this awesome story of Brian about to just straight up murder a sexual predator in cold blood.
So they basically were like, wait the fuck, that's bad.
Yeah.
Wait the fuck. I like that one.
It was a really touching scene. The friend who he ends up dating her later on, but she her scene where she's contemplating suicide is actually a really well done scene where she's like contemplating like the immense stress that her family had to go through just to get her into college in the first place, and her having to fail college because she doesn't want to do what this guy wants with her, and not being able to face the shame of seeing her parents after all the work that they did. And it's a really touching scene.
dark and fucked up, but touching.
Yes, which is exactly my type of story.
I gotcha.
Otherwise, we get a Metamorpho story where they travel back in time to ancient Egypt, and all of this is happening. Oh yeah, what makes this actually the problematic of the most is at the same time that Brian and her are breaking up, she has just recently been introduced back to the parents that she had, where we learn that she was actually 13 when she debuted in the story.
Oh dear.
She wasn't 15.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So, luckily though, Halo's actual ongoing storyline in this run is the best part of it, because we get introduced to the Oracles, we get introduced to Halo's struggling concept with identity because she didn't realize she was an Oracles because amnesia. She ends up quitting the Outsiders for a bit, and we get a somber scene of Katana is like, I finally got you back and you're leaving again. Because she has this incredibly strong mother bond with Halo, and it's really heart-wrenching.
Well, having lost her kids once, she doesn't want to lose another one, right?
Exactly. And she already had to, say goodbye to Halo when she went off to be with her parents, and then they end up dying in the story, so Halo rejoins with the Outsiders, then learns what she actually is as an Oracles, and so leaves to go on a soul quest, leaving Katana again.
Poor Katana. She just wants to be a mom, goddammit.
Exactly. She ends up joining a cult on accident, led by Cobra.
Oh, that's charming.
Yeah. Not the G.I. Joe Cobra, the DC's Cobra, which is actually, despite how goofy they are as a villainous organization, they're actually probably DC's most dangerous and competent criminal organization ever made. These guys are, the one group of people who've actually, made me think that they were going to take over the world.
Well, then.
Mm-mm. They end up stealing a government laser beam from the Star Wars program and are, threatening to use it on global powers unless they get, they go full gold number James Bond in this situation.
Yeah, so are we sure these aren't the same guys that are running around in G.I. Joe? I mean that in the plot. They're literally stealing a giant space laser.
G.I. Joe's Cobra isn't nearly as horny as DC's Cobra is.
Well, I see.
Yes. There is a very significant scene that I know of where Lady Eve, the leader of Cobra's wife, girlfriend, we don't know their specific relationship status, is just draped over him in just a string bikini while stroking his chest while he monologues evilly. These two are in some kinky shit.
And the hero who has to deal with this is just looking at their buddies like, are we about to star in a dirty movie, or what the hell is going to happen to us here?
Exactly. But they defeat Cobra, and that leads, and they're all reunited. Halo is finally reunited with Katana. Everyone is happy, and it's been effectively 3 years since the run started, and so DC is like, hey, we kind of want to play with Batman again. So this is where we get to the end of Batman and the Outsiders and lead into The Outsiders with the Looker storyline, where we have to introduce the new character to the team, who was a supporting character for a bit of the series beforehand, and she is revealed to be secretly part of an ancient civilization of underground elves, basically, where they are all beautiful and gorgeous and have psychic powers, and she is secretly one of them all along, and the storyline is just about her getting her powers and the outsiders traveling underground to go to meet this ancient civilization underground and dealing with the political ramifications going on there. And then returning home to after finally gaining Looker as their new member, and then they go on a bunch of missions like back to back in the behind the scenes where Batman is just like because they were underground for so long that a lot of crime had just sort of piled up in Gotham while they were gone. So Batman's like, we need to solve this now. We need to get clean up all these bad guys. And they were pushed so hard that Brian eventually realizes that shit going on outside of Gotham was just as bad. In fact, the Nazi guys that they fought in the first issue of the Outsiders in Markovia have returned while they were busy dealing with Batman's mess. And Geoforce is pissed because they're like, no, we established this team to help the world, and we were just busy cleaning up your mess of things. And Batman is like, we can't talk and debate about this. We need to do this. And it's like, yeah, no, we're leaving. And they just like fire Batman from the team.
They fire the boss.
They just go independent. And that leads us into The Outsiders. But I don't know if we have time to go into a whole nother three-year run at this point.
Well, it's been about 35 minutes, and I was anticipating about 2 hours, so...
Oh.
So we got time. We got time to talk about whatever you damn well please, so...
I was trying to rush this a little because you made it sound like we had a short amount of time to do this.
That's on me. My sense of time is not good. So...
That is okay.
So, we got... I'm just going to double check just to be sure. I got to get things done by 4. It is almost 2. So... Yeah, we got about an hour and a half to go. Before I have to go, so...
That's fine. I can keep talking as much as I need to.
By all means. You know, Talkin' Lady Shiva was on here for 5.5 hours one day, so...
Yeah. So let's double back a little just to talk a little more about Batman and the Outsiders and the stuff I had to gloss over a little. Because there's a few, like, supporting characters, interesting background details, and some other problematic stuff that I did not get around to yet.
Keyword is yet. This is now the time to do it.
One of the interesting things is, like in issue 3, a lot of them were being set up with their new status quo, civilian identities, and all that. Brian was going to college, Halo was going to school, and getting raised by Katana, and... Batman's decision for Katana, besides raising Halo, was that she should open a bookstore. But not just any bookstore. A exclusively Japanese bookstore.
Interesting?
Yeah.
I mean, like, okay. It's interesting because I could see the issue here. Right? We have a Japanese character who's only selling Japanese books and is super focused on their culture, which kind of plays into the whole, old stereotypes about Japanese folks. But at the same time, this was the 80s, right? This was the 80s.
Right.
Japanese media wasn't as widespread as it is today. One could, and I'm putting emphasis on could, in theory see this as, hey, this is Tatsu trying to bring her culture into Western eyes so that more people know about it. This is just one way to look at it, you know what I mean?
And another chalk-up detail is, one could also see this as Michael Barr making Bruce a little culturally insensitive, because it's Bruce's idea for doing this. This isn't like... Katana deciding I'm gonna sell Japanese books to people. It's Batman already buying and stocking a Japanese bookstore and just, you should run this place for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a good thing to look at. Way to look at it too. Like, I'm sure if it was Tatsu's idea, it wouldn't be as bad, because, hey, it's Tatsu's idea. But it's Bruce's idea. Or, the enemy of the modern era, the rich white guy, setting this up, is like, dude, seriously? You couldn't have given her a flower shop like Black Canary? Good God.
There's also the third potential idea that Bruce is being intentionally racist because he's doing this as Bruce Wayne Playboy billionaire. They don't know that Bruce Wayne and Batman are the same person yet at this time. He's just, Batman and I work together a lot. I'm going to go and show you this business idea that I have for you to do. And it's possible that in order to, like, this is not, this is me just hypothetically headcanon right now, but Bruce is intentionally being racist, giving microaggressions here, to make Tatsu just think he's not Batman.
Guys. that's I'm laughing because it's so freaking ridiculous. It's like, bro, seriously?
I mean, this was in 83.
Bruce?
This was in 83. The Silver Age was still fresh in everyone's mind at this time. Bruce, like, Silver Age Bruce absolutely would fake a racism to make people think Batman and Bruce Wayne were different people.
Yeah, but, like, at the same time, as Bruce, you just gotta stop and think, what the fuck am I doing?
Exactly.
If this Bruce had been around when Babs was around, I wouldn't be surprised if he made some weird comment about her being in a chair as a cover, and it's like, dude, this is your niece. I keep comparing, I always kind of compared Babs being like Bruce's niece because of how close he is to Gordon, but it's like, dude, you don't need to try so hard. If Clark Kent can get away with it with glasses and a three-piece suit, you don't have to go that far.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like just wear a fake beard and you're set.
In other news, Tatsu also has another interesting storyline that also has some subtle implications of racism, but one of the interesting things that I do appreciate with The Outsiders, and it's not racist to Tatsu on the page, it's racist through the characters. So you can always infer this as Mike Barr not being racist himself with the writing, but being in the time and being like, yeah, people are going to be a little racist to this character because it's the 80s.
And also, Bruce is a rich white boy. He's not going to... Well, he's... Yeah. Right? Like, his persona is that he's not going to give that much of a shit, so...
Mm-hmm. And in a later storyline, Halo notices that Tatsu is all single, quote-unquote single. To clarify for the audiences, because not everyone is aware of this, Tatsu's husband was killed with the Soul Taker as well. So he is inside the sword, and she can talk to him whenever she wants. Her children, sadly, were burned to death alive, not killed with a Soul Taker, so they didn't get to come along.
Unfortunate, but,
Yeah. So, Tatsu is very much still married, but to outside people, it looks like she's single. And Halo doesn't realize this yet, and decides to hook up her Japanese teacher with Halo. With Katana.
Oops. I mean...
Yeah, it is a hugely awkward scene for both of them, as Halo tries to do a meet-cute by luring her teacher into the bookstore that Katana is working at, and then just sort of ditching them together, trying to see if they'll hook up together, and they're just like, yeah, this was just a bad idea.
And then And then Tatsu probably pulls Halo aside, like, "What the fuck were you doing, you little brat?" And explaining things from there. I'm just picturing like this, like the kid's just like, "I'm just trying to help," and then Tatsu's like, "My husband is in my sword. Don't be."
We don't get that much detail, but they do they do talk things out. Katana explains to Halo that things are more complicated than they seem, and she doesn't need her interfering with her love life.
Yeah, so it more eloquently put than I put it, but it would have been funny to see Tatsu chew out Nova. Nova? What the hell's her name?
Oh. Yeah, the names are a bit, Halo's name is Gabby.
Halo. How did I get Nova from Halo?
I don't know. It's a 2-syllable word. Her street name is Gabby, if that'll be easier.
I gotcha.
Yeah. The same issue is actually the issue where Halo and Geoforce first decide to start dating in a also super awkward situation, because this issue is just Halo decides to meddle in people's romances, where Geoforce is trying to court this girl at school, at the college that he's at, and so he's taking her to his dorm, and Halo decides to be a bratty younger sister to Geoforce in the most not thought out plan at all, where she's wearing one of his t-shirts and just acts like they are dating to condescend and be catty to the girl as she's coming in, to make it look like Geoforce is bringing her in for like a menage a trois.
What were these people thinking when they were writing this?
To be fair, Halo... Okay, not to be fair, but in context, Halo is still partially amnesiac. Throughout the series, she picks up and learns more things. She never stays dumb or ignorant, but this is still very much at her, I still don't really understand how the world works stage in life.
Sure, but at the same time, it's just like... Wow. That's a play.
And this was when Mike Barr was editing his own book. So, ideas have not been properly screened.
And thought out and whatnot.
Yeah. But, the girl leaves in a huff, and Geoforce chases her around. And at first it just seems like, okay, they've got this bratty brother-sister dynamic where they're pulling pranks on one another. And because this was also actually in retaliation, because Halo had gone on a date with a boy from her school in a previous issue, and Geoforce decided to be a stocky older brother to make sure that nothing inappropriate happened. So she decided to pay him back with the t-shirt routine. And so they've been having this awkward brother-sister dynamic going on, and so he chases her up into the sky because they can both fly, and then, plot twist, they decide to start kissing, which is where things go downhill in that story.
Goodness gracious me. Like, I get them writing being as, like, bratty older brothers and sisters. I have an older brother and a younger sister. And an older sister, so, you know, I'm very much the middle child. But at the same time, it's like, man, was this guy ever a sibling? Because they're like caricatures of how siblings are. Because, like, yeah, me and my brother, we used to fight a lot. But, you know, that was the extent of it. We got into a lot of fights with each other. We never, like, tried to sabotage dates or anything.
Yeah, it was messed up.
Hilarious until it's like, oh my god, what are you doing? But I don't know. It's funny until it's like, oh, dude.
Yeah, it's funny until the lips start locking.
Yeah. Then it's just like, okay, Get an editor.
Yeah. Otherwise, the other two important characters in the series I haven't talked too much about, Black Lightning and Geoforce, primarily because their ongoing subplots are leftovers from their pre-existing runs. So for Black Lightning, in his instance, in his solo run in the 70s, he had an ex-wife that he was in the middle of, like, they were in an will they won't they situation, that will they get back together or not, we didn't know, and the story ended before we could ever figure out. So they were just trying to figure it out in the pages of this run, where he tries to call her, she doesn't pick up, he tries to resume his job teaching. It's for him, his story, Black Lightning's storyline does not get picked up into full gear until we get to The Outsiders. That's where his storylines actually start to, like, have some narrative impact. And as is with Metamorpho also, his whole thing is that because the only reason he went on his big archaeological expedition that turned him into a monster is because his fiance's father is an asshole. Simon Stagg is, like, people call Lex Luthor...
Whoa. Metamorpho has connections to Simon Stagg?
Simon Stagg debuted in Metamorpho. That's his nemesis.
Can you tell that I only know about the character from Batman Arkham Knight?
Yes, in the, Simon Stagg, a lot of people think, like, Lex Luthor is, like, the most evil businessman in DC Comics. No.
He's just the one with the most exposure.
Yeah, Simon Stagg is the epitome of evil, corrupt businessman. He is not interested in beating a superhero. He is exclusively interested in money. The only reason he is Metamorpho's villain is because he's a disapproving father-in-law who does not like his son-in-law.
That being Rex Mason.
Yes.
Poor bastard.
And he would much rather have his unfrozen caveman son-in-law be the one to marry his daughter.
Wait, hold on. What?
That was not an exaggeration. This is the Silver Age, remember?
Oh, right. Stagg is a Silver Age bad guy. Okay, I was like, hold the phone.
Simon Stagg has a minion, I forget his name off the top of my head. He is a caveman that he unfroze and basically invited to be part of his operation. He became his right-hand man, and the caveman is creepily obsessed with marrying Sapphire, Simon's daughter. And Simon really wants her to marry the caveman because he considers the caveman to be his, like, true son, and he wants him to inherit the business for him. And so it's this really dumb triangle situation where Sapphire wants to marry Rex, but she's like a pampered princess girl who doesn't know how to survive without her dad's money, and Rex doesn't want to take her away from her dad, and Simon being an asshole, and the caveman being creepy.
The caveman being creepy because he's a caveman, and that is the unfortunate stereotype at the time. I really wanted to make a Captain Caveman joke, but, Captain Caveman wouldn't be nearly as creepy, I imagine, as this guy. I mean, he's got Josie and the Pussycat Dolls to hang out with. He's good.
Yeah. He is, he's definitely a very, like, he is typically, the caveman is typically Metamorpho's primary, like, physical adversary. Like, even though, like, Metamorpho is a demigod, like, the guy who is, like, getting into a punch fight with is with a caveman.
Because Silver Age. This is the same point. This is the same point in time where Batman had a rocket ship and the Joker painted face paint over his mustache.
And also, this is the same time when Batman could travel back in time by falling asleep.
Yeah. And how about the Batman of all nations?
Yep, totally not what Batman Incorporated was ripping off.
Yeah. At least Batman of All Nations, like, had multiple different nations and whatnot. It didn't have the corporate tone, but
Yeah, it was more a United Nations type deal. But anyway,
we're getting sidetracked in the glories of the hilarity that is the Silver Age.
right. So, Metamorpho's primary storyline in this run was traveling back to ancient Egypt and learning about the whole Orb of Ra, because that is the big MacGuffin of the Metamorpho series, as the thing that turned Metamorpho into himself is this magic Orb of Ra from ancient Egypt times. And so they go on an expedition to get the Orb of Ra again so they could try to cure Metamorpho of his condition, and it ends up sending them all the way back in time to ancient Egypt, where Metamorpho gets mind-controlled by the orb and they need to save him.
Because that's how that works.
Mm-hmm. I mean, with Metamorpho, because he is so overpowered, it's really hard to make a story about him that actually is, like, interesting. Because it's not
the Superman theorem a little bit, right?
Yeah, except in the Superman situation, it's an exaggeration that people who don't realize what the actual stakes of a Superman story are. With Metamorpho, he only has two major goals in his story. Get married and get cured. And both situations are just full stop. Like, there's nothing that happens after they're accomplished. If he marries Sapphire, he's married to Sapphire. Like, there's nothing that's left over after that. If he gets cured, well, he's cured now. You can't do anything after that. Like, you can certainly have them get cured, have them get married, but you need to create an entirely new story, a new goal to replace those goals to make Metamorpho interesting. And with Metamorpho, his powers are, like, he is not just a shapeshifter. Like, a lot of people might just think, oh, he's just a shapeshifter like Clayface, like a Plastic Man. No, this guy is probably, like, the most powerful shapeshifter in, like, Plastic Man comes close in terms of sheer power output as a shapeshifter, but Plastic Man is what I would call a topographic shapeshifter, where his powers, his body still has a base form that he's manipulating, and he can still only shapeshift to the volume and surface area that he is actually able to become.
And of course, and he can't do things like change color. Like, I mean, I recall there was one instance where he basically passed out trying to turn his nose blue. So
exactly,
he's basically a red and spandex insert object here.
Mm-hmm. With Metamorpho, on the other hand, he can literally just dissolve into oxygen, or turn his fist into titanium while his other hand is sulfuric acid.
Yeah, I remember that because of the Brave and the Bold episode where they were making the Outsiders basically a thing. And Metamorpho turns into oxygen in order to revive Wildcat at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then Wildcat ends up training Black Lightning, Metamorpho, and Tatsu. Weirdly, Halo's not involved in that, but...
But yeah, so because Metamorpho is this powerful, the only real ways to make him interesting for, like, a storyline is to make him a supporting character. So that's what happens with him a lot of the time. With his story arc, it was more just to give a new cool location for the rest of the Outsiders to fight in. Oh, now we're in ancient Egypt. Let's go fight things here. It wasn't really about Metamorpho himself, but rather just to give the team an interesting thing to do.
Right.
And that happens a lot with Metamorpho. Like, in the later... It's just a byproduct of being as broken as you are with no real interesting stories to tell with him, that he just ends up being a lens for other people's stories to be told in.
Because it's very hard to make somebody like Metamorpho, for lack of a better term, interesting enough, I think is the right term.
He is interesting in that he is a he has a strong personality, which is a big defining feature of Metamorpho, that you can always rely on him having a good joke to tell, or a good one-liner, or having a strong personal relationship with Sapphire. Like, as an individual person in, like, this is why he makes a strong status quo character, just a supporting character for the rest of the team, because his base personality is really solid. When you see Metamorpho act, he doesn't act like another person. He acts like Metamorpho, and so that always creates unique interactions with the rest of the party.
I getcha.
He has this level of almost callousness about him because he is so indestructible and his problems are so Silver Agey and bizarre that he can't really grasp normal problems a lot of the time. So he can come across as kind of an asshole because he just can't relate to normal people anymore.
Yeah, because he's like, well, I'm literally whatever I damn well please, and my main enemy is a billionaire businessman asshole with a gorilla or with a caveman as an enforcer. I don't... marriage problems? What are you talking about? I punched a caveman last week, you know what I mean?
Exactly. He can end up putting his foot in his mouth, literally sometimes, just to, on accident, which is very, nice. He has very strong chemistry in that regard, then, to Black Lightning, who is incredibly grounded in his, personality and character. He is originating from the blaxploitation genre. Originally, his powers weren't even superpowers. He had a device on his hand that could just deliver an electric shock to people, and it had like one-time charges, and he had to recharge. Like, he wasn't intended to actually like be a metahuman character. He was a blaxploitation noir where the Black Lightning was pretty much just a name that they threw on the guy, and then like 3 issues later gave him the electric power, the electric shocker thing, because they realized, oh, we should probably do something with the lightning name on his that we gave this guy.
But they didn't give him electrical superpowers because reasons?
He ended up having them later on.
Yeah,
in the Outsiders.
The fact that they didn't give them to him right away, that's what's surprising me, you know?
I believe that is primarily because he was trying to be a blaxploitation character. There was a heavy emphasis on realism with him, where they wanted him to be like just a normal guy who was like his big problem was he was fighting gangs. He was fighting mafias and criminals, and like things like that were the problem. He was a normal guy. Like, he was just a school teacher who happened to be an Olympic athlete. Like, those are kind of above average things to be, but they're like still grounded in what you could be.
Yeah.
And then you get at the beginning of The Outsiders, they just sort of wipe away the electric shocker and just say, oh, he has electric powers. He just doesn't really know how to use them that well yet. He's still developing them. And then after Invasion happens, with the gene bomb blows off, that's when his powers get kicked into overdrive, and he's able to do all those powerful things with the electricity.
Gene bomb.
Beforehand, all he could really do was just like shoot a lightning bolt out of his hand and hopefully hit the target.
Gene bomb. When was the gene bomb story?
Invasion happened in 1989, I believe.
Okay, so I'm trying to think, because it's ringing a bell, but I'm not quite sure how.
The gene bomb was actually a really big and important status quo update that happened right as the dawn of the 90s was happening, where a lot of characters...
The Dominators made the gene bomb, right?
Yes, they did. They were part of the Invasion. The 4 alien alliance was the Dominators, the Durlans, the Kuns, and I forget what the 4th alien race was, but their whole thing was that humanity had this infinite potential for metahuman powers, and they wanted to experiment on humans to find that power for their own control. And so they created the gene bomb as both a way to kill off a lot of people, but also to awaken a lot of people's metahuman powers. So a lot of characters from the Silver Age and Bronze Age that had tech-based powers were suddenly having those powers turned into metahuman abilities. so that people could just do things more elaborately. There wasn't as much a limit on technology anymore.
Hence why Black Lightning got his zappy hands.
He got bigger zappy hands. He already had the zappy hands in Outsider specifically, and Outsider started in '83. But all he was able to do at that time was just throw a lightning bolt out of his hand. By the time the '90s came around, Black Lightning was like full electrokinesis.
Yeah, he became Cole McGrath.
I'm not familiar with them.
Infamous. Let's try Raiden.
I'm familiar with Infamous.
Yeah, so the main protagonist of the first two Infamous games. That's who I was thinking of.
Gotcha. Yeah, he became basically that guy.
Nice.
So I've talked in. There are a few other supporting characters about the series that I should probably bring up. There is Denise, who is Geoforce's friend from college, who he eventually starts dating. She's the girl who almost committed suicide that he saved.
Right.
And then there's also Dr. Jace, who is an important second supporting character. Not much for what she does in the story, but more, she's one of the characters who helps start the team together, as she is the scientist that Metamorpho was trying to find to get his cure, and who he had been talking to for most of the series. And she is eventually also the team's undoing when we eventually go around to the ending of the series in '86 or '7, I believe. The run but other than those two, those are the only two real major supporting characters that stick around as we get in. Oh, I should explain more about who Looker is, because...
Yeah, I was like, hold on. The only Looker I know comes from Pokemon, so...
Fair enough. Looker, I explained a little. She's super gorgeous, and she has psychic power. She can telekinetically move objects and manipulate people's minds. She can make what people do whatever she wants them to do.
Gotcha.
Her origin is that she is an incredibly mousy, insecure, shy woman who is pretty average looking, but thinks she's really ugly. And she's married to this guy, and who's always saying, you should be more assertive, you should be more proud of who you are as a person. But she's all like, no, I'm too ugly. And then she gets the Looker powers, and she's utterly gorgeous. And at first, it feels really insulting. It feels like like she's this incredibly superficial character. But over the course of the Outsiders run, because the Batman and the Outsiders ends pretty much immediately after Looker joins the team. So we have to go actually into the Outsiders to figure out what's going on with Looker. We learn a lot more about what her life was like beforehand, where we learn she had chronic pain and was basically suffering from body dysphoria. Even though she's a cis woman, she was just incredibly uncomfortable with what her body looked like. And so her husband becomes a real creep about her new body, where he's like, I want you to go back to being what you were before. And it's like, ends up divorcing her because she just leaves him and goes to goes to LA with the rest of the Outsiders, and is like, he just sends her a divorce by mail.
That's like breaking up with somebody by text in today's standards. It's like, that's just, excuse me?
Yeah. It's like, the guy is a horrible husband, and you just, as you get a mental picture of what Looker's life was like, having all this intense dysphoria, chronic pain, hating her body, and having this husband who just did not care for her input at all, constantly told her that she should be more confident about herself, but then when she did become more confident about herself, hated everything about that.
Because he didn't realize what that actually entailed, probably. It was like, wait. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she's got agency now.
We can't have that.
Exactly. So she's one of those characters you start to dislike at first, because she's not about to explain herself to the audience. She doesn't exposit a lot about herself. She's a very private person, especially about her past. She only like brings up things in small dips. Like we learn about her having chronic pain in passing as like an offhand comment, and as a result, she comes across as a very shallow and insecure, a very shallow and conceited woman at the beginning when she first debuts. And like it looks to her like all she cares about is image and looks, and you start to realize that this is just a woman living her best life now. She finally has the body that she's always wanted, and she's not looking a gift horse in the mouth. She is just reveling in the fact that she finally has what she wants.
If you got it, flaunt it, right?
Exactly. And so you really start to... She's a character that you really love and appreciate after you get to know her.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I think it's about time to get over to the Outsiders run. We've dwelled enough on the first, on the New Hope. It's time to get around to the next movie.
Exactly, which is perfect because 1 hour down, one more to go, give or take.
All right.
Give or take, because I don't mind if there's like 5 or 10 extra minutes of overlap because we, goodbyes, questions, and
exactly
wishes for what you want to see in Injustice, that kind of thing.
All I want in Injustice is a Katana.
Once Katana's in, you're good?
Oh, yeah.
Just
to be able to play as Katana, like, she has so many cool things. She's got, like, I'm going to just gush about this one little thing. In the 2003 run, she ends up killing Sabak, who is a Shazam villain, and then she just can summon him whenever she wants. So she could just summon an 8-foot-tall fire-breathing demon whenever she wants.
Sounds like she could be a combination of Kenshi and a puppet fighter, which is an archetype that I really want to see NetherRealm tackle properly, that is. Like, the closest they got to making a puppet fighter, I think, is, like, Atrocitus in Injustice 2 with how he summons Deathstar to help him out, but...
Yeah, she would definitely be a very interesting rush-down puppet fighter.
A rush-down puppet fighter with elements of Kenshi, because, the idea of summoning spirits from your sword is just something that I can't help but see Kenshi in, because that's what he does. But,
Fair enough.
But, again, Katana did it first, so Kenshi stole from her.
Sadly, she doesn't do it a lot. It is a very underutilized ability of hers. Outside of the Sabak situation, she only uses the Shadow's power once in Batman and the Outsiders and once in The Outsiders. It is a power she rarely actually uses, despite how awesome it is.
Probably for personal reasons. But we'll get into that when we get into The Outsiders proper.
Yes. So, The Outsiders begins where it left, with them firing Batman and running to Markovia to stop everything. And it sadly results in Markovia itself deciding we need to enter the public stage. We can't just be a private monarchy nation hiding in the middle of Eastern Europe. If we want to protect ourselves, we need to have alliances and trades with other European nations. And so their new status quo thing is they establish a Markovian embassy in LA, where Brian runs the embassy as his new civilian identity while also managing the Outsiders.
I gotcha.
Their secret base that they have established themselves in, since they can't live in the Batcave anymore, is they're in a oil rigger that isn't actually an oil rig. So, it's just a hollowed out oil rig that's pretending to be what it is, and it's just a secret base.
I mean, hide in plain sight, that's the idea, right? Except I don't think there's any oil off the coast of Los Angeles, so that's not very well thought out.
No, but it's not like there's going to be other oil rigs out there to, draw questions.
Well, at the same time, you'd think if there were other... Well, I guess if there were other oil riggers, yeah. it's a weird catch-22 where it's like, if you have more oil rigs, the disguise is initially more convincing, but then you'd have other oil riggers being like, what are those guys even doing over there? You know what I mean? It's like, it's like...
It eventually does come to bite them a little, where a supervillain uses the secret identity of an oil baron to come to their oil rig to talk business with them, as a way to infiltrate the operation to steal something from them.
See, that's smart. You see a weakness in the whole secret base thing, just be like, hey, I can exploit that.
Mm-hmm. That also leads to the general theme of, if the general theme of The Outsiders was about teamwork and slowly coming together as a unit, The Outsiders was very much about realizing that unit as a complete, fully functioning one. At this point in time, they primarily just fight a lot. Not fight each other, but fight other groups and villains. The Outsiders is a much more action-oriented run compared to the Batman and the Outsiders. Where Batman and the Outsiders was a lot more personal character-focused, The Outsiders is a lot more big anime showdown fights.
Right.
And I say big anime not as an exaggeration, where a lot of modern team books, when they get into big fights, they'll just sort of devolve into mosh pits where everyone is just sort of vaguely throwing hands at one another and like somehow connecting. No, with The Outsiders, every fight they divide up amongst one another to a proper enemy to attack, and like it's a full battle manga 1v1 showdown between each of them.
Good grief. I love it, but it's like, goodness gracious, that is something that I would have to see, which very briefly is going to lead me to something that Judge was talking about. If I remember correctly, they were gushing about modern Outsiders with how, like, Black Lightning somehow has, like, a JoJo summon, and Katana is just slicing bullets out of the air like it's nothing. And you made the anime fighting comparison, and then you also bring up that in the 80s and 90s, the Outsiders were basically the same thing.
In the 80s, yes. The 90s, they were very much just... The 90s Outsiders run is a by-the-book 90s edgelord book.
Oh, but you know what I was aiming at, right? Like, you made the
Yeah,
comparison, and I was like, wait a minute. This is a common theme for the Outsiders. Like, is the Outsiders supposed to be DC's answer to Dragon Ball? I don't know.
They are very much they are probably one of the best battle comics around. They have some of the best fights, because every villainous group they fight has as many diverse powers as they do, and they fight a lot of really interesting dynamic villains. Their first villains, not so much the most interesting. They fight against the Nuclear Family, which is a set of robots built by a scientist trying to spread fear about nuclear armaments and the dangers of nuclear power plants by building nuclear-powered robots with nuclear powers to try to cause nuclear Armageddon.
I know about the Nuclear Family. Were they not always Firestorm villains?
No, they debuted in The Outsiders.
Huh. Look at me learning new shit.
Mm-hmm. Don't worry, they will borrow from Firestorm as much later on.
Gotcha. And then Firestorm will be like, hey, I want to use one of your bad guys now.
Pretty much. Another group that they end up fighting was actually one that they get introduced in Batman and the Outsiders. But it was during an annual. So this was where they were allowed to stretch their legs a little bit more and be a bit more experimental. They end up fighting probably my favorite villainous group that they fight, the Force of July.
Of 1 month.
It's a pun, you see, off of 4th of July.
Oh no. Oh no. Is this going where I think it's going?
They are a hyper-patriotic team of not supervillains, but rather extremely right-wing heroes allying for conservative values.
Yep, that's going exactly where I thought it was going. They're Americana the bad guys.
Exactly. They are Major Victory, who is basically he's their Captain America stand-in, but he's more US agent than Captain America. And he actually predates US agent by 2 years.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's an interesting detail. We have Lady Liberty, who is dressed up like the Statue of Liberty and casts spells through her torch. Mayflower, who is a young British girl who wears a pilgrim costume and has like poison ivy powers before poison ivy got her powers.
Oh, that's right, because Poison Ivy didn't always have plant-based powers.
No, she only got her powers in the late 90s as a response to the Batman the Animated Series cartoon giving her those powers.
Yeah, I forgot that she was mostly just using more traditional eco-terrorist tactics.
She wasn't even an eco-terrorist back then. She was just a thief.
Yeah, with a plant theme.
No, her only theme was using pheromones to brainwash people.
Well, I mean, she also had a plant-based costume. That's what I mean. Like she had the plant.
Okay.
She had the plant theme going on.
Yeah, she had a plant-themed costume, but none of her like weapons or abilities. She actually hated nature back then. She was like a full-on valley girl who hated walking around in the woods.
Which is hilarious considering, again, Batman the Animated Series, like many things of the DC animated universe, being so influential to modern comics, both for good and for bad, that we tend to forget some of these things. Like, one of my favorite examples of all time is some of the characters that the DCAU created. I mean, you obviously have Harley Quinn, right? Like, Harley Quinn is the poster child of the animated series. But then you also have to remember that Superman got a couple of villainesses too that were debuting in the animated series, Livewire and Volcana.
Mm-hmm.
Which Volcana doesn't get a lot of love, but Livewire sure as fuck does.
I personally like Volcana more myself.
I mean, I think it would have been cool if like she had actual volcanic powers instead of just, shooting fire out of her hands, but,
Yeah.
if the shoe fits.
Yeah, no, if she had, like, lava and obsidian and stuff as powers, that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, like, if I were to reinvent Volcana, that's what I would do. I would make her a volcano-based villain rather than just a strictly fire-based one.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mayflower, like I said, she is basically... She has the plant-based powers that Ivy will eventually get. So she's able to just summon giant redwood trees out of nowhere to crush Geoforce. Then we have the Sparkler, who's basically the kid sidekick to Major Victory. They definitely have this Captain America, Bucky Barnes dynamic between the two of them.
Well, with a name like Sparkler, I wasn't exactly expecting the Hulk,
He has zappy powers. And he ends up fighting against, he can, like, absorb Black Lightning's lightning and shoot it back at him.
Cool. So,
And the last... What?
I was just gonna say, they did Black Lightning versus an electric-based supervillain thing before Young Justice did it with Livewire and had the most corny fucking line I have ever heard in a TV show.
Once you go black...
I would rather not finish that. But...
Yeah. He ends up beating the kid just by like, oh, I can just use Kung Fu on you instead.
Yeah, because Black Lightning knows Kung Fu.
Yes.
That's an actual thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was his big thing, that he was actually more of a Kung Fu guy who happened to have metahuman powers, rather than a metahuman who happened to also have no Kung Fu.
Yeah.
And the last one on the team was let's see, I can't. What was the last one? It doesn't matter. But yeah, so that was major. That was the 4th of July. Major. They would eventually go on to do more things. They were pretty much. They were an interesting B team in the Outsiders book, where they would eventually team up with the Outsiders against Russian enemies later on in the story. Because this was late 80s at the peak of Russia being the big bad of DC.
Yep, and then right before the Cold War started to actually end and walls start coming down and shit.
Mm-hmm. We also had a villainous group, the my brain is parting all of a sudden. Let's talk about the individual character arcs then again. For Geoforce, they didn't really give him a ongoing story arc this time around. His primary arc was dealing with the political relationships between Markovia and entering the diplomatic space of the rest of the world, which eventually culminated in Markovia becoming a constitutional monarchy, like Britain is, where they have votes and elections for parliamentary purposes, as well as having a representative monarchy as well, which will come up into effect later in the 2009 run, where they seem to completely forget that.
Uh-oh.
Yes, but in this run, it eventually results in an assassination attempt on his brother, and he ends up, his brother's wife, Brian's sister-in-law, ends up becoming the figurehead of Markovia, but at the same time, Markovia has been opened up to be a democratic monarchy, so the real voting power has now been brought back to the individual people. For Black Lightning, like I said, his story arc really gets into full bloom here, where in LA, he ends up coming across his ex-wife, and they end up meeting up again, flirting, charming back and forth, and they end up meeting, because his wife works as a humanitarian aid provider, and he ends up meeting this foreign diplomat guy named President Bentama, who is a really scummy villain, and he's a really good villain for the Outsiders, where he's actually a complete totalitarian despot in his nation, but he acts out in public when he goes to do diplomacy in other nations. Like, his place is some great place that just needs humanitarian aid to help get it prospering. So it's basically a con man stealing money from humanitarian aid agencies, while he keeps his people under an iron thumb.
Yeah.
And the Outsiders end up going to there to investigate things going on over there, and end up getting taken out by the by the Russians who are working with Bentama. Excuse me. And have to do a full military coup.
Goodness.
Yeah, it's a really intense thing. They all think Looker has betrayed them because she decides to be sweet on Bentama and betray the team, but it's just her way of trying to make the most of the situation until she can pull get them to help. Because it's not like she can help them if she's also in chains with the rest of them.
Yeah.
And sadly, Geoforce gets the main brunt of the situation, where he can't access his super strength or anything because they give him these power inhibitor, but I also just work him like a mule. So he's just worked constantly, and you just get to see just how much punishment this guy can take in a slave mine.
Yowza.
Yeah. At the same time, he has also been entering into a long-distance relationship with Denise, who is still finishing up college in Gotham. Unfortunately, this is also when another shitty romance plot involving Geoforce happens, where he and Looker start an affair.
Okay, then.
Yeah. They only start it. It is only the inkling, like, just beginning of the whole situation. As Looker is interested in pursuing something real with him, and Geoforce is caught in the extreme guilt of, oh god, I'm cheating on my girlfriend, and he just straight up just ends the affair and just confesses the whole thing to his girlfriend. Like, nothing real happened, but he was, like, still having the affair, and it was eating him up, and he told her, and they had a whole discussion about their feelings afterwards. It was a much more well-structured affair storyline than last time.
But still, bit of a
Yes.
miss.
Looker also ends up having her storyline being trying to become a model in LA because she's all about her beauty, so she wants to have a job that just like I'm pretty, I can be a model, and so she ends up getting blackmailed by this detective that gets hired to dig up dirt on her, and he decides to try to blackmail her for money when he learns about her mind control powers. And he's like, I got these tapes that'll go live if I don't tell them to if I don't like punch in the zip codes and all that, like situation that probably could be solved with mind control, but we're going to allow for narrative drama here.
Well then.
And then the private eye gets killed, and Looker gets framed for his murder. And we get this infamous comic cover of Looker behind bars crying, saying, I've been framed. And then in the bottom corner, we see a small little window with Halo also crying because she got braces.
What are you folks doing?
It was hilarious.
Whose idea was it to make that the cover?
It's a hilarious cover. But, yeah, Katana's story arc is where she gets a Tengu spirit ends up possessing her body and putting her soul in the sword, and Halo has to take the katana with Tatsu's soul in it and travel to Japan to get Katana's body back.
Oh, that's awkward.
Yeah, it was a really fun storyline there. I like the inclusion of Japanese spirits into Katana's sort of hemisphere of things that could go on. It's not just the Yakuza that she has to fight, but she can also fight like spirits and demons and stuff.
Yokai and all that fun stuff. Ow.
Mm-hmm. And but Geoforce, Black Lightning storyline sort of ends after they reveal and expose Bentama for the cruddiest, because he was kind of dating Black Lightning's ex-wife at the time. And when they learn about it, she just like gets really angry about it, and Black Lightning and her start dating again. But that continues their forever tumultuous on-again, off-again relationship that is always in turmoil in terms of DC continuity.
Because they can never seem to agree on a damn thing. The DC
They-
folks, anyway.
Yeah, they have notoriously just had a very rocky relationship. Like, they clearly like one another, but they clearly don't like being married to one another.
Ever heard of just casual dating or shock being friends?
Yes, men and women being friends without having sex.
I know. Scandalous, no? I say that as one of my favorite ships with Babs is with fucking Ted Cord of all people. But, you know.
That's a cute one. With Halo, her story arc is what starts my crack ship that really does. It feels way too real to be a crack ship, but it's never been confirmed. So as I mentioned earlier, with Black Lightning's original solo run, we get introduced to the Masters of Disaster.
Yep.
Who are a mercenary villain group who just do whatever the job pays them to do. They are led by New Wave, who is a hydroform. She can turn into water and do shit like that. And New Wave's sister, Windfall, who is a nice girl who's really only in the team because her sister is the psychopath and is making her. And she, by her namesake, has the ability to control wind.
Yeah.
And Windfall immediately becomes friends with Halo. They become very friendly with one another very quickly, and Windfall occasionally will help the team beat the Masters of Disasters by, like, not looking when they're sneaking up on the team and stuff. And eventually, New Wave gets tired of this and basically forces Windfall that you have to kill Halo because I know you're soft on her. And it's at this point in the story, it is very clear, at least from my perspective, that Halo and Windfall are gay for one another.
Gay
This is
AF.
Yeah, these two, like, the story makes way more thematic and interesting sense if New Wave, rather than just being a psychopathic villain older sister, that she's also a homophobe. Because, like, that's not too far from the rest of the things. You could be, like, if you're a psychopath, odds are you're probably also going to be a homophobe.
And then she's like, hey, you need to kill your girlfriend.
Exactly. Like, trying to kill the gay out of her sister.
Which is a bit of a, like, if that was out on paper, that would be like, whoa. that's how you make a villain not likable.
Yeah. Windfall ends up betraying the team, betraying the Masters of Disasters, and joining the Outsiders, but not before New Wave decides to, because in an unrelated storyline at the beginning of the run, they end up fighting against the Nazis that took over Markovia, and they have cloning technology to revive the leader who got killed in the first issue. And so the Masters of Disasters were on hand as mercenaries for that storyline, and they take the cloning tech as a result of that job, and New Wave clones Windfall and makes an evil clone of her to go and capture. And when Windfall betrays them to go help the Outsiders, they capture Windfall and swap her with the evil clone, and has that evil clone infiltrating the Outsiders to get intel. And it's at this point that Halo is also, like, extremely gay with Windfall. They're, like, the closest of close best BFFs, as, like, she is, like, loving being with Windfall, not realizing that she's a clone at the time. And she's, like, having sleepovers with her all the time. Like, it's very, like, this is not two hetero girls hanging out together type of relationship. And eventually Batman shows up, and he's able to deduce the clone's identity, and they do a rescue mission and save Windfall. And the two of them hang out together and basically be gay girls without ever revealing that they're gay.
Wonder if a modern take on that story would have been a little more overt with it.
Possibly. We have had a modern return of Halo, but sadly she's only had 2 actual stories, both written by Mike Barr as, like, non-canon solo stories that never get brought into the main canon.
Damn.
Yeah. Halo has not actually since Rebirth, really, Halo has not been part of the DC canon ever. Like, she was kind of around at the dawn of New 52, but that was just because Batman was kind of still doing his thing at the dawn of New 52.
Right.
But anyway, so for most of it, Halo's big story arc is just being gay with Windfall. That is her big, storyline that she is focusing on. And for Katana, her big storyline is, I am still super insecure and not sure. Like, her story kind of hits a brick wall where Halo and Katana are finally reunited as mother and daughter again. But I think Mike Barr kind of ran out of ideas on what to actually do with that relationship now that they were finally reunited. So it ended up being that Katana was just now the most insecure mother ever, where she was constantly worried that other women in her age bracket were upstaging her in terms of motherhood, particularly Looker. She had a constant rivalry with Looker over Halo's motherhood status, even though, like, for Halo, it was very clearly Looker was the fun aunt and Katana is my mom, because it's just like Looker tries to assert some sort of motherhood over her versus Katana, and Halo is just like, sorry, no, she's my mom, not you. So it's just like, it's a one-sided insecurity on Katana's part, where she's constantly worried that another woman is being a better mom for Halo than her, even though Halo is just like, no, you're my mom.
Well, I think part of that is also stemming from the fact that, the last time she had kids, they got burned alive. So it's not like the insecurity is unfounded.
Exactly. It's just, it goes on for the entire Outsiders, for the entire 80s Outsiders run. It doesn't really expand beyond that. Like we mentioned earlier, her her big focus story arc is about her needing to be saved by Halo. It's not even really about anything Katana specific beyond her being Japanese.
Yeah.
So it's very clear at that point that Mike Barr really liked Katana, really liked her personality and dynamic she had with Halo. He was just, at that time, not really sure what to do with Katana narratively. And otherwise, for the most part, The Outsiders was just a lot of really solid fight scenes between, I mentioned the Masters of Disasters, the Nuclear Family, the Force of July. They end up fighting for a very short time some Russian villains who had a very generic Russian-y name, and they just can't, or they'll fight some smaller villain group or something. But it's a very action-oriented run for the second half of the series. And then the ending of the series comes around, where we get to learn why I mentioned that Dr. Jace would be the team's undoing. Because the story goes into the Millennium event, if you're familiar with that event.
Not really, but I presume it's the build-up to the year 2000.
No, actually, this happened in, 88.
That doesn't...
Millennium was a precursor, was a lead-in to the Invasion storyline, where Millennium was about a secret doomsday cult called the Manhunters, who had infiltrated society at every level, having members of their organization secretly be working for them, and literally anybody on Earth could be a Manhunter. It was a big event. A lot of stories got tied into it, where some character on their established cast would be revealed to be a Manhunter.
Wait, like
a lot of them,
like the old GLC Manhunters, or
no, no. These were these were eventually retconned to be related to the GLC Manhunters, but at the time these were just a secret cult society.
Okay.
The No Man Escapes the Manhunters started here with Millennium. And then later got co-opted to be part of the GLC Manhunters. But for the Outsiders, their Manhunter infiltrator was Dr. Jace. And so she basically uses her established friendship and relationship with the Outsiders to completely destroy them. And it's a very bad storyline because it doesn't really make any sense about what goes on, but they end up getting traveled to another world where they end up meeting a character named the Atomic Knight. And this is still part of the Millennium event, so they just feel like a guest character joining. But according to Outsiders, like, mythology, the Atomic Knight is officially a member of the Outsiders because of this stupid story. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But he is the Atomic Knight is like a micro-world character where he's like part of a small pocket world where a separate dimension where his people live, and he's just like this space knight guy, and he goes in and he helps them, but he's like the most unimpacting, uninteresting character around. But like they devote an entire like 3 issues to him.
Gotcha. That's unusual. Yeah.
And then the series ends with Halo being knocked into a coma as a result of the big Millennium event, and Metamorpho being destroyed, and the rest of the Outsiders going their separate ways. Metamorpho would eventually come back as a result of the gene bomb blowing up, reawakening his body from his stasis period. But Halo herself would remain unconscious in her coma for another 5 years. As Katana would remain by Halo's bedside, just waiting for her to wake up, except for one random Suicide Squad story where she ends up having to avenge a blood debt that she owes and has to go help the Suicide Squad with a mission in Japan.
Well then.
Before coming back to just sit by Halo's bedside waiting for her to wake up.
Yeah.
It was a really bad ending it was a really bad ending to what was otherwise my favorite comic book run ever.
Gotcha. That's
yeah.
Spooky.
Mm-hmm. But so do you have any questions for because I've explained pretty much everything that I personally think is worth explaining about the Outsiders at this point. Otherwise, I could just like pull up a wiki page and like talk issue by issue about what happened in the Outsiders. But I think at this point, the audience understands who they are and what is so amazing about them.
Yeah.
So, but like, if you have any particular questions that you would like to ask, I guess now would be the perfect time.
I actually don't really have too many questions because you explained them very, very well. But we've got about 10 minutes to kill. So So what I want to do is something a little bit different. I want you to... Normally these pitch things last about 5 minutes on the WraithCast, but I'm going to give you 10, give or take, to pitch an all-new Outsiders story. How would you connect it to the DC universe? Who would you get involved? Whoever. I'm going to set up the timer now. Are you ready?
Yeah.
And go.
Okay, so the primary initial cast I would go, if we're doing like current main continuity, I would have Katana, Lady Shiva, Halo, Signal, Black Lightning, and Major Victory as my main group. Major Victory has had heroic uses as well as villainous uses, and he's a fantastic character and should hang out. And Lady Shiva is a perfect character to fit onto the Outsiders team. It was a brilliant idea on that part. And otherwise, in terms of team official setup, I would bring back a storyline that was hinted at the end of Hill's Outsiders run, involving these elemental spirits that were going loose, and Katana having one of them, and they needed to go fight the others. And it would basically be a big Catcher the Four MacGuffin type of storyline where there's 4 big elemental spirits involved, and they would be a big secret mafia conspiracy trying to use the spirit to reinstate the Japanese Empire and take over the world. As these types of outsider storylines tend to involve larger than life type of big conspiracy villains, and each of the outsiders would have a dedicated specific villain or element that they would be related to fighting. And my idea for Lady Shiva would be to fight someone who had the steel element, because these elements were supposed to be based off of the Taoist 5 elements, not the Western 4 elements. So steel, wood, earth, fire, and water. And so Lady Shiva would end up fighting a guy who had the steel element inside him and could just become steel, and so she would have to, like, with her bare hands, beat up a guy made of steel.
Ouch.
And Major Victory would have to, like, earn his stripes and be a hero in the storyline and prove that he's not just a racist conservative character. And I'll also have Windfall in the storyline, and I would 100% finally get down on paper and have Halo and Windfall actually be gay together.
I was anticipating that, but honestly, I was kind of surprised it took this long to get to that point. Not that
I'm absent-minded a lot of time. I can forget characters very easily.
Not that that's a bad thing. It's just because you were so interested in that idea. I guess it was just one of those things. Like, I thought you would just get that off rip, but.
They would end up definitely, because I would definitely have the Masters of Disasters be, because of their whole elemental theme thing already, I would have them be big minions involved in the storyline, serving the guys as, like, their muscle before the spirits are all collected and turned into the big muscle. And so Windfall, this would be the first time Windfall would actually be brought back into the DC during Rebirth era. And so this would be a chance to redo her meeting Halo for the first time. And this time around, it would straight up be confirmed to be New Wave is a homophobic psychopath trying to control her gay sister, and Halo helping her escape this horrible life and be gay together in this as they're all together by themselves. And that would probably be my first way to just start the run, as a way to establish these characters all joining together. Lady Shiva and Major Victory being the sort of, we're not the traditional heroic types, but Outsiders in general is not typical heroic types. They started with Katana, who kills people, so that's not really something they're too worried about. And Windfall being a villain, joining the team as well. Signal learning to manipulate his shadow powers more, that was established in the Hill Outsiders run. That was definitely a very interesting idea that I would really want to explore more. And then right after that, I would jump into the traditional style of Outsider stories and give each Outsider a dedicated solo storyline for each of them that would revolve around the rest of the Outsiders, helping them solve the problem, as a direct callback to how the original Outsiders run would handle all of its problems, where one person has a problem and they can't solve it without the entire team at their back.
Nice.
I would probably, that total run would probably go up for about 18 issues total, probably maybe 20.
Nothing too crazy.
No.
You've still got 5 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add? Any cameos? Any one-off assists from maybe outside the traditional sphere, like Superman or Oracle or whomsoever?
There would probably definitely be a cameo appearance from the Terrifics, because I definitely really would like Metamorpho to at least show up. But having read the Terrifics, I feel Metamorpho had way better chemistry on that team than he did with the Outsiders. And so I would just have Metamorpho still be on the Terrifics and have him have a guest appearance of the Terrifics themselves, just showing up in the run for them to, like, interact with and hang out with. Otherwise, there might be another return to Markovia where they have to help Brian solve problems there. A return to the there might be a return of the Force of July where Major Victory now has to fight his old team, or another return of the Masters of Disasters afterwards, like wanting revenge as well. Or, probably more likely than not, I would just make a whole nother team of villains full of original characters that I would have to actually think about making, not just off the spot, but they would end up fighting as like their new nemesis team that they would probably end up fighting with some new thematic gimmick rather than elements like the Masters of Disasters or nationalism like the 4th of July. I don't know. Something like the Animal Kingdom or something.
Some sort of theme. And I mean,
Yeah.
one idea, if I may add, is we have the outsiders, right? They are supposed to be the ones that are outside of most of all of this stuff. So what if you had something called this is obviously just a mirroring, but what if you had something called the Insiders, which are parodies of Justice League heroes because they're hip, they're the ones everybody knows. So they're like villains riding on the coattails of these more popular heroes.
That is definitely an interesting idea. I've been a fan of the idea of villains pretending to be heroes as a narrative concept. It's definitely one I had my eye on for a while. Major Victory was kind of like that as well with his initial storyline was 1984, where he was the muscle behind a 1984 conspiracy to tap into people's television sets to monitor people and feed them disinformation.
Well then, yeah. So with this Insiders idea, they could even like present themselves as heroes, like a version of a person who wants to emulate Wonder Woman and then emulate Superman and blah 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 blah. And the next thing you know, they actually turn out to be assholes and trying to ride on fame. So it becomes an identity theme because the outsiders are true to themselves, but they're on the outskirts. Whereas these people are not comfortable with themselves, so they have to pretend to be somebody else.
Right. That would definitely be a very interesting one. The Wonder Woman character fighting either Katana or Lady Shiva. That either one would work. A Flash character fighting one of them. Maybe Lady Shiva fighting the Flash character and Katana fighting the Wonder Woman character. Major Victory would obviously fight the Superman-related character. Halo would fight the Green Lantern character.
I think what would be cool as like part of the whole theming thing is that Windfall, is that her name?
Yes.
Windfall and Halo are gay AF together at this point. And then these people are it would be like hey, we're true to ourselves. These people are not. So who should you be listening to? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
And that is gonna basically do it. That's gonna basically do it. Thanks for. Sorry it took so damn long to finally get around to recording this, but shit happens.
That's fine by me. I had a lot of fun.
And I'm glad to have you around on this one because, it was so fun to do the Shiva one with Judge, except Judge took almost, it was a 6-hour long thing. And as much as I wanted to continue, I literally couldn't. So it's nice to like take the idea and then run with it with somebody else with another part of the expanded DC law that needs more love.
Well, if you want me to do this again, but be a lot more negative, I'll definitely have plenty of stuff to say about the 90s run.
Well done. Normally I try and keep things positive on the channel because positive vibes are good vibes, but I am also fully aware of the power of negative press, so maybe we'll have a ranty episode. Who knows? Sounds highly entertaining to me. Thanks for coming by, honey. I'm glad to have you on the show.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you guys decided to tune in. So this will probably go live on the weekend. I'll make sure to tag you on Twitter. And all of you do the shebangs, the likes, the comments, the subscrizzles, the clicking on bells and stuff. Like and retweet on Twitter and man, I am not cut out to be a social media mogul. But anyways, don't forget to be awesome, and we'll see you guys on the other side.